Hi guys, now today we are going to discuss about the sexual reproduction in the plants. Okay, as you know that animal reproduction system is a little bit complex, Nana, and plant sexual reproduction is very simple one while we are comparing with the animals. Okay, so if you observe in our surroundings, there are different kinds of plants, various species we are familiar with that. Almost on this earth, we have 2,75,000 of species are flowering plants. 2,75,000 species of plants are flowering plants. Much of the plants which are familiar to us are also flowering plants in our surroundings. Okay, and in these plants they are varied, ranging from very big sized and big weight, tons of weight, to very small sized plants like which is equal to the rice grain. And even the sal plants which are growing in the Himalayas, giant cactus growing in the deserts, okay, and a lot of orchid plants which are growing on the stems of forest plants. All these kind of plants are what, Nana? Flowering plants. Most of the familiar plants in our surroundings are flowering plants, okay, and they produce what, Nana? Seeds which is present inside the fruits. So not the naked fruits, okay, now so not naked seeds. So if you observe the reproductive part of a plant, so that is called what, Nana? Flower. So how these flowers help in the reproduction process, how the plants can reproduce, we will discuss now. Okay, the reproductive part of a plant is called flower. So it contains basically how many parts, Nana? 4 parts. So one is what, Nana? Petals. Now sepals. Petals in different colors, sepals in green color. Okay, now this is a stag-like structure which is attached to a branch. Now this part 1, 2, 3. These 3 parts together what, Nana? Female reproductive part called what, Nana? Carpel. And these are called what, Nana? Stamens. Stamens. So these are the 4 important parts of a flower or a reproductive part of a plant. What are that, Nana? Petals, sepals, carpel and stamens. So in all these 4, Nana, petals and sepals are non-essential parts, means they did not produce any reproductive cells. So in the stamens and carpel, they are producing reproductive cells or sex cells or germ cells. Germ cells. That's why they are very important parts. Okay, these 2 stamens and carpel are what, Nana? Essential reproductive parts of a flower. Why? Because they produce germ cells or sex cells or reproductive cells. Okay, now then what is the use of, or what are the uses of these sepals and petals? Sepals protects the flower and gives a perfect shape by holding them, and petals attracts the insects for cross pollination. Okay, now so these are the 4 important parts. In some flowers, either they contain stamens or carpel, means they have only 3 parts. Petals and sepals are common, but either they have stamens or carpels in the center. So that kind of plants are called what, Nana? Unisexual flowers. Example, Nana? What, Nana? Bottle gourd, papaya, etc. Unisexual flowers. Bottle gourd, papaya, etc. And some flowers, what, Nana? Some plants, they contains both the stamens and carpel inside their flowers. That are called what, Nana? Bisexual flowers. Okay. Example, datura, hibiscus, etc. Okay, now so these. So here these are non-essential parts. We need not to discuss about them. Why? Because they help just in attracting and protecting. Now what about the stamens and carpels? So each and every one we need to read clearly or study clearly. Carpel contains what, Nana? 3 parts. Again it contains 3 parts, Nana. So for what are that, Nana? Let's see. The upper part of the carpel is broad end to what, Nana? to develop or to attract the pollen grains and the germination of the pollen grains. So this part can attach the pollen grains and also helps in the germination of pollen grains. So that is called what, stigma. And below the stigma we have a tube-like structure. Through this tube only pollen grain germinates and forms one tube. So that is called what, style. What is that called, style. Now the last part what, a tube, bulb-like structure or a sac-like structure contains what, female sex cells that are ovules. So that is called what, ovary. Ovary located or seated on a base. Okay, that is called thalamus. It's seated on a base called the thalamus. So that is ovary. Third part is ovary. These three together called what, carpel, are also called female reproductive system, are also called as what, gynoecium. What is it called, gynoecium. Okay. Now, what are the other parts? Stamens. In each and every flower, more than 5 stamens will be present based on the different kinds of plants. Okay, 5 to 10 stamens will be there in that. So they are divided into 2 parts. One is a stack-like structure that is called a filament. Yes, and this is called what, anther or pollen sac, are also called as what, pollen sac. A bulb-like structure or tube-like structure, tip of the filament is called the pollen sac or anther. In this anther only the male reproductive cells, pollen grains are present or produced. Pollen grains. Okay. So these 2 parts together called what, stamens or male reproductive parts, are also called as what, androecium. What is that called, androecium. Together called androecium. Okay, now so the structure of flower or reproductive part of a plant completed. Now let's see how the fertilization takes place and where does the fertilization takes place. Generally, the pollen grains fertilizes with the ovum present inside the ovary. So fertilization takes place inside the ovary. Fertilization takes place inside the ovary and forms a zygote. Before that, we need to discuss one more important topic. If the pollen grains of a anther of one flower reach to the stigma of the same flower, pollen grains fertilizes the ovule or ovary of the same flower, that is called self-pollination. What is that called? Self-pollination. Example what, pea plants, green peas. Okay, what is self-pollination? Let's see. Self-pollination. If the pollen grains of anther or pollen sac reach to the stigma of a same flower, that is called self-pollination in a simple way. So what is that? If you want to write it more elaboratively, the fertilization of the sperm cells or pollen grains of one flower takes place to the inside the ovary of the ovules of same flower. Ovules of the same flower is called self-pollination. That is a little bit critical. So simply, pollen grains reach to the stigma of a same flower, that is called what, self-pollination. Examples what, pea plants. Now what is cross-pollination? Why plants prefer cross-pollination? For example, see here, stigma is little bit upper than what, stamens. So in a different situations or in a different kinds of plants, stamens are more height than a stigma, or in some kinds of plants stigma is more height than stamens. In that kind of plants, and even sometimes sacs, pollen sacs or anthers can rupture very fastly. So in that cases, what happens, Nana? Self-pollination is not possible. Okay? In that cases, what happens, for example, here pollen sacs or anthers are little bit lower than the stigma. So it is not possible to reach the pollen grains to the style. In this stigma, in these cases, what happens, Nana? The plants can prefer the other type of pollination, that is called cross pollination. In that situation, they prefer cross pollination. So what is mean by cross pollination? In a simple way, pollen grains of one flower reaching to the stigma of another flower which is located on the same plant or another plant of same group. Clear, Nana? Pollen grains of one flower reaching to the stigma of another flower which is located on the same plant or another plant. So that is called cross pollination. So many plants can prefer cross pollination, Nana. Okay, now. So example what, Nana? Datura, etc. Okay. Now we'll see the structure of very small sized sex cells or germ cells or pollen grain, etc. Okay. For this we need to do an activity, Nana. Take hibiscus flower, yes, and take one slide, put one drop of water on the slide and gently tap the hibiscus flowers anthers on them. Then you will collect some yellow color spots on the slide and take 1 or 2 anthers into the water droplet and cover with cover slip. Put it under the microscope and observe carefully. So here you can see a small oval round shaped structure. Yes. So inside that lot of cytoplasm, and along with that 2 male nuclei it contains. 2 male nuclei it contains, Nana. So this is called what, Nana? Pollen grain. All male reproductive cell, pollen grain. Okay. So these pollen grains contains what, Nana? 2 male nuclei inside it. And these pollen grain only reach to the stigma, and whenever the conditions are favorable, pollen grains what, Nana? Germinates and produces pollen tube. Okay, they forms a pollen tube. So this is pollen tube. Okay, now observe the ovary. Inside the ovaries, round circle shaped like structures are attached to the ovary with the help of stack like structures. If you observe the ovary, inside the ovaries there are ovums or ovules attached to a pulp like structure or pillow like structure with the help of some stack like structures. So that are called ovums or ovules. Based on the type of plant, they contains 1 or 2 more than 2 ovules inside it. Some plants contains only 1 ovum. Some plants contains 2. Some plants contains more than 2. Okay, now. So ovules are different in number in different types of plants. Okay, if you observe the ovule inside, ovule contains what, Nana? 1 embryo sac present inside it. 1 embryo present inside it, Nana. So this is a ovule. Each and every ovule contains one sac like structure inside it. That is called the embryo sac. That is called the embryo sac. Each embryo sac contains what, Nana? 7 cells and 8 nuclei. 7 cells and 8 nuclei. So in these 7 cells, 3 cells will towards the upper side of the embryo sac, and these 3 helps in supplying of nutrients to the egg cell, Nana. So that are called antipodals. What are that called, Nana? Antipodals. Now towards the downside or towards the entry of pollen tube, here we have 3 cells. In the middle it is a egg cell, Nana. This is called female nuclei. egg cell or female reproductive cell. Egg cell. To either side of the egg cell, we have two more cells now that are called synergids. Synergids. So these synergids will help to the egg cell in supplying of nutrients and also guiding the pollen tube towards the egg cell. Now in the center of the embryo sac, we have one big cell that is called fused cell with two nuclei. Two nuclei. Generally, in the earlier stage, it is a 8-celled structure, but in the center, two cells fuses together and forms a fusion nuclei. Okay, so that cell contains two nuclei, and these two nuclei called what? Polar nuclei or polar cell. Polar nuclei means they fuses together and forms one polar nuclei. So this is the structure of what? Embryo sac. Okay, now how the fertilization takes place? Let's see. So after ovums are maturing of the ovulation, what happens, Nana? This stigma produces what, Nana? Stigma cells produces some chemical substances or some sugary substances. After the maturing of ovums, Nana, stigma produces some chemicals or some sugary substances, so that contains a lot of nutrients, Nana. So these nutrients help in germination of pollen grains. Okay, whenever the pollen grains are reaching to the stigma, these pollen grains can absorb the nutrients and sugar solutions, and they starts germinate the pollen tubes. Starts the production of pollen tube. So number of pollen grains will reach to the stigma. Only few of them can germinate, and very less number of pollen grains can extend their pollen tube towards the ovary. Okay. From the pollen grain, their two nuclei are shifted into or pushed into the pollen tube, and they travel through the style and reach to the ovule. Then they reach to the embryo sac. They reach to embryo sac. Whenever they reach to the embryo sac, so this pollen tube ruptures and releases the two male nuclei into the embryo sac. Okay. Now what happens? Whenever these two nuclei enters into the embryo sac, one male nuclei fuses with the egg cells nuclei and forms what, Nana? Zygote. And forms a zygote. So this is called a fertilization process. This is called a fertilization process. Then the second nuclei, whenever it is entered into the embryo sac, the second male nuclei, whenever it is entered into the embryo sac, it fuses with the polar nuclei, are also called a fusion nuclei. So before going to mate with the male nuclei, that polar nuclei, two nuclei mate with each other and forms what, Nana? Polar nuclei, are also called as fusion nuclei. So fusion nuclei, what, Nana? Fuses with the second male nuclei. And forms such a material called what, Nana? Endosperm. That is called a endosperm. So this is 3N stage, and after the fertilization, zygote will be produced. This is 2N stage. Okay. So this fusion of second male nuclei with the fusion nuclei is called what, Nana? Double fertilization. That is called a double fertilization. Okay. So the result of double fertilization is what, Nana? endosperm. Okay, now after the production of zygote, what happens? So this zygote develops into embryo develops into seed. Okay, now after the fertilization process, zygote develops into embryo and embryo develops into seed. Okay, now the ovule develops what? A thin tough coat. So that ovule coat is develops into or converted into seed coat. Okay, so that is converted into seed coat. So this is about fertilization. Now what that fusion nuclei plus a second male nuclei produces what? Endosperm. So this endosperm during the development it produces it performs so many cell divisions and it produces a lot of material contains nutrients which helps for the development of seed. Okay, these endosperm stores a lot of nutrients helps for the development of the seed. Okay, endosperm. Now after the fertilization, the total ovary converts into what? The total ovary converts into fruit. The total ovary converts into fruit and the remaining parts like sepals and petals they shed off from the plant or shed off from the flower. So here what happens? Ovary develops into fruit, sepals and petals, and remaining male reproductive parts like stamens also shed off from the plant or from the flower. Okay, but here endosperm in some of the plants like dicotyledon plants etc., like bean plants, endosperm is completely utilized by the seeds. For their development. Means the food material is from the endosperm it is shifted into the seeds. So seeds can use the total food material and they develop for the other process. Okay, so example beans. Means in the beans what happens? Seeds they do not contain endosperm. Why? Because for their development the total endosperm is utilized. So the total nutrients for the embryo is stored in the seeds, and that seeds contains either one cotyledon or two cotyledons. What is meant by cotyledons? If you break the seed, it contains two seed leaves or one seed leaf. Okay. So generally here bean is what? Dicotyledon. Okay. It contains two seed leaves. So means the food material stored in the cotyledons, seed leaves for the development of embryo. But whereas in some plants like corn and castor, this endosperm develops with the seed, and during the embryo stage and during even the development stage also, this endosperm surrounding by the seed, and it also supplies the food material to the seed in the embryo development also. Okay, means what? In the bean seeds, dicotyledons digest the endosperm and store the food material in their cotyledons, and whereas in the corn and castor seeds, endosperm still present surrounding by their seeds. So it directly supplies the food material. Okay, now next, if you observe the bean seeds or corn or castor seeds etc., so they contains what? Some parts inside the cotyledons. They have some parts called hypocotyle and epicotyle. So these two parts are what? Attached to the rod like structure of the embryo. Epicotyle and hypocotyle. So these these two parts are attached to the rod-like structure of the embryo, and this endosperm helps in the development of this epicotyle and hypocotyle. Clear, Nana? In the bean seeds, that seed leaves or cotyledons digest the endosperm and store the food material in them for the embryo development. But whereas in a monocotyledons like castor and corn, the endosperm develops along with the seed. Okay. Now just observe one seed, how it develops its embryo. Take some bajra seeds or bean seeds, etc. Soak them in a water for 1 day. Then remove them from the water and tie them in a cotton cloth and keep them for 24 hours in a warm place. Now you will observe what, Nana? Some seeds will germinate. Okay. If you slowly open the seed, you see what, Nana, in the center. It contains what, Nana? One plumule and one radical. So embryo you will see. So this is called what, Nana? Embryo. Embryo, the plumule can develop, plumule can develop into stem-like structure, and the radical can develop into a root. Now the life cycle of a plant. So this embryo, if you sow the seeds, what happens, Nana? The seeds can develop into plant. After the plant are developing into certain height and by producing certain leaves, it starts producing flowers. Okay, and then flowers, after maturing, fertilization process takes place either by self-pollination or cross-pollination. Male gametes reach to the stigma. From there, they reach to ovary. Fertilization takes place, and after the fertilization, what happens, Nana? After the fertilization, zygote formation takes place, and because of so many cell divisions, zygote develops into embryo, and embryo develops into again seed. If we sow the seed, again a plant will come. So this is the life cycle of a plant. And in the year 1812, Charles Darwin observed something, that if you keep the plant isolated with the same group of plants, it can dominantly develop self-pollination. Okay, then if you keep the plant in the same group, it can depend on the cross-pollination. He concluded by doing isolated the plant. Okay, if you keep the plant in isolated, it can develop self-pollination. Okay, no. Now, so till we discussed sexual reproduction in the plants and animals. So what are the differences between sexual and asexual reproduction? Let's see. Differences between sexual reproduction and asexual mode of reproduction. So here in the sexual mode of reproduction, what, Nana? Two parents are required. Two parents are required. Here only single parent is required. Okay, now in the sexual mode of reproduction, formation of gametes takes place. Gametes formed. So no gametes. No gametes are formed. Now, so fertilization of gametes takes place. Fertilization of gametes takes place. Obviously, there is no gametes, so no fertilization of process. Okay, no gametes, no fertilization process takes place. Okay, Nana. So here, it will take a lot of time to identify their partner and to reach the male cells to the female cells, etc. So it's a time being process. Time being process. Here it happens in very less time. Why? Because no need to identify their partner. Why? Because it takes place only with a single organism. Okay, Nana. And here the offsprings or the younger ones will get the characters of both mother and father, and sometimes new characters. So here characters are combination of characters. Here the characters are, or the children are exactly identical to the parent. So this is the differences between the sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Okay, Nana? Still, if you have any doubts and queries regarding this topic and total lesson, please text in the comment box. Thank you.